27. Okay,
Yeah.
here we go. We're at the end. This actually could have been near the top in my mind.
Okay.
Because this is something that I get asked in all kinds of forms every day. The question is, or it can come as a question, or it can come as an accusation, like a smart aleck.
Give me an example of the real world example of how this sounds.
So the question, the topic is, why do bad things happen to good people? Or why do good things happen to bad people? So the first question is the one that most people are concerned about.
That last one's
The
my
last
throw-in.
one I know is your twist. But so when I'm in someone's home and they're telling me about something that happened to their child, an accident on the corner, and he was just happened to be there, and he's such a good kid, and why did that drunk hit him? You know, my sweet mother has cancer, and she's dying, and she has a sister who's just a major jerk, and she's had this good health and is actually being kind of nasty right now to my mother who's dying. I mean, on and on. I could tell you a million. You know, why I don't feel, you know, on and on. So.
Okay.
And they're good people. These are all good people. Why is this happening to them?
All right. So let me ask you. I think it's a perfect example of how it really works out in real life, right? That exact example.
Just all kinds like that.
Okay. So then what ends up happening, though, is do you ever say to yourself when they're saying that, is this a person asking because they're skeptical of the knowing that I'm a Christian, or are they asking from the bottom of their heart? In other words, why is my beloved mother, right, who's a good woman, why is she suffering? So when people ask me that, I try to answer one way. If it's a guy who's just like, hey, Bill,
let me get you here.
You know, like, tell me how this works, you know.
Right.
When then they give you some example, like, how fair is it for God to do this, or why did, you know.
Yes,
Yeah, so
the tsunami, they just all
they
those
give
good
you all
people
the
over there.
tsunami
Yeah,
thing.
something happened.
Sometimes they mean the tsunami thing
Right.
in the right way, and sometimes they don't. But you need to decide which, I think, and how to reply to it.
And how to respond.
Because if, suppose that person, what do you say? Where do you tend to go when somebody really is heartfelt asking you, how come my wife died, she's 31 years old, right? The baby survived, she died.
Boy, you have to take it slow, because they're not really asking for fast answers, for one. And you have to look behind their eyes and feel their grief. And you have to be more in tune with listening and being willing to walk that path with them, even though it may be several days or months or years in solving this. So I'm not saying there's a quick answer.
What can you do? There's a difference between what you can do in that moment and what you can say. So what can you do in that moment if it's really heartfelt? Can you give them a hug?
Well, that's always a given.
Can you get them run errands for them?
Anything, anything I can do, help them with the laundry. I mean, anything to relieve just the normal pressures of life, so their mind can sort, and let them know that you actually are caring.
So, can you afford, if somebody asks you though, with that heartbroken thing, can you afford not to answer the question at all? In other words, this isn't a theological study at this moment,
right?
But I always want to be really careful to guard what?
Just
God's reputation.
Right.
Because I'm always going to say, look, nothing happens, right, that God doesn't either allow or initiate. So I want to be real careful. She's in God's hands, right? Now, I don't preach that in that some way. I've got my arm around him most of the time. I'm saying to you, look, listen to me now. But he's a good God, right? He does all things perfectly. We do not want to raise our voices against God, right? It's not wise. At any moment,
right.
Even at this really bad moment, he's the only place you can go for comfort. There's meaning in it because he exists. Right. Otherwise, it'd be meaningless, and I don't want you to fall into that trap. Now, that's about as far as you ever have to go with people, because at that moment, if you've built a trust up with them, they'll hold on to you,
right?
And they want you to be the anchor, right? They don't want to think that the boat's at sea spinning around and everything's just out of control. They really don't want that at that moment. They need a steadying presence. And I
And
think you
it's
do
God.
that for. So I'm saying that's the one you normally get. And here the reading is going to be different than what we're talking about. In a minute.
Right.
Okay. I want you
Right.
to. But now.
But often, yes. So this is a huge question constantly because all kinds of bad things are always happening. Okay, and people have the view that they're good, and so after in a comforting situation, that's a whole thing on suffering almost in my mind and how to work someone through that. But like what I'm thinking here is like these objections and questions are often from in a discussion more with someone that's hostile towards God. Often that comes up like, so, if God is so in control of everything and he's so, you call it sovereign, which means he's the boss of it all. Why does he let bad things always happen to these good people? It's more of a sarcastic, not just like a moment where it's degrading to God, like he's doing something wrong.
So, I think that's why you don't think that adding that other question is important. But I try to say, one of the things that plagued me is the opposite question, like why do good things happen to bad people?
Yeah.
Because nobody's perfect, right? That's what I will say.
And everyone agrees with that.
Yeah. You're not perfect and I'm
Right.
not perfect. Yet God shows mercy to us. You wake up every day. Just like the woman who died at 31. She woke up for 31 years times 365 days, and God gave her breath. I don't want to lose sight of that.
Right.
The kindness of God to in these things, right? So normally the way I hear it is so-and-so got hurt, right? And when you get that, the suffering that comes from a car wreck or whatever, and permanent impairments, all those things, which we know all too well.
Right.
So then you have to say, I'm really not willing not to voice my opinion about Providence. Right? I know God's governing these things. And I know that when I say he either initiates everything that comes to pass or permits, like the confession says, Westminster Confession, upholds, directs, disposes, and governs. All things. All creatures act.
Say that again slower.
God upholds, directs, what did I just say?
He upholds, directs.
Yeah, you just got me out of my rhythm. That's how I do it right there. I have a certain rhythm.
But sometimes we say the word providence, just like providence, and I don't know that everybody understands like how he really, he is in charge. He's opposing, directing.
Upholds, directs, disposes, and governs. So he's governing all things. He does it most easily.
Right.
So are there any accidents that are really accidents? In other words, in God's viewpoint, is there a single accident?
Nothing catches him
No,
off
it's our
guard.
language we use because we don't know the reasons.
Right.
He does. So many times you'll hear people launch into stories about, well, so-and-so got her foot cut off, and it turned out that she was able to do this instead, and she couldn't run anymore, but guess what? She became a doctor and saved lives. I get that. Sometimes, though, uncomfortably, for somebody like me, you don't have the end of the story.
Not yet.
No. So I have to say, is he eternally wise?
Yes.
Okay. Is he eternally good?
Yes.
They don't want to hear it, but yes, he is.
It doesn't feel good, but
I
yes.
cannot afford to let them say that.
Right.
Because I know, lingering in my mind is that Isaiah 45 verse, let the potsherd strive with the potsherds of the earth.
So what's a potsherd?
It's the shard of like a broken, like if you had a broken pot.
Oh, okay.
Like Job used it to get the boils off the bottom of his feet. So you're like, that's what Isaiah says. Be careful when you raise your voice.
Yes.
Who are you to say, what have you made? What are you doing? Be careful. You're a potsherd dealing with potsherds, and he's wholly other. Okay? So now I'll say that in a lot of different tones, but you have to, I'm not about to let you, while I'm sitting there, I'd rather have you tell me to leave than to say, I just didn't know what to do, Lord. I just shut up and let him curse you in front of me. I'm not going to do that.
No.
My allegiance is to him. I'd rather lose your friendship over it. And I'd rather have the people in the room say, Bill Moore's a heartless so-and-so, because God's reputation is meaningful to me.
Well, and it's truth.
Well, it's truth.
And
That's
I've
exactly
watched different situations that we've been in where those words have had to be spoken. And like we ran into someone a couple of years ago that said, I hated you when you told me that. And I was so mad at you for how many years? But that kept running through my mind, and it actually brought me to see it that way, and it brought me to Christ. So, yeah, it's not fun to, yeah.
The last thing I expected after all those years.
Right.
And he just said, if I could have gotten over it, you know, your bluntness, he said, I just couldn't get over it. I hated it.
Yeah.
It just ate at me. And then when I came to Christ, I realized that's how God used it.
God used that to open up his eyes.
Yeah.
So all of these things God is using, that's providence. And if we can sharpen our eyesight to really view things through what his hand is doing, it helps us feel secure in this answer.
Right. And one of the things that happens here, and let's skip the surly college kid.
Right.
Because normally what I will do with that is more likely to say, did you get that from Google, or did you pick it up from your professor? You know,
Yeah.
because
That's
prideful people, when they come at you, if you ask them with that snickering thing, that tone, you know, like, tell me where you got this. Because I'm always going to follow it up with, I just wish that you would tell me what you know and what you think, and you weren't always just parroting these things. Now, is that going to hurt the guy's feelings? I hope so. I want to run him off normally. I'm not interested in, if it was one-on-one, I might want to keep him.
Right.
If it's in a group, I'd rather show him up. He has the nerve to do that in front of a group. I'll have the nerve to expose him in front of the group, right? And then when the guy, now he can stomp off and do all that petulant thing he can do. But people in the group normally say, a couple of them, like, Mr. Moore, you're too hard on that guy. I'm like, well, think about what he was wanting to do. He was really wanting to upset your faith and do these things. And I'm saying, not here today. Okay? Now, if he comes back,
and wants to have a discussion.
private, I'll tolerate it for an hour. But always I want him to know that I know him, that he's parroting the thing.
Right.
Because it eats away at a man's pride when you accuse him of that, especially when he's guilty. But when you get into these discussions, let me ask you this. Because we were doing the thing about innocence in the last video, are there good people, really good people?
Well, we discussed it at length in the last video, but at the end of the day, the Bible says that no one does good. There's no good in us. We're born with a sinful nature. So we can do good things, like outwardly good things, but you know, even my good stuff that I want to be good, because I like to be good. If I would look into my heart closer, like he sees it, there would be some poor motive. There'd be something about Lois in there, like, look at me, I'm good, or something. If I don't even like to look, to be honest. But if I would look deeper, there'd be some hypocrisy, something poison, just a drop or a lot of
Your
something.
junior theologian badge coming in the mail tomorrow.
Oh, get
I'm
out.
going to mail that thing to you tomorrow.
Stop it. But
That
it's
was
true.
good. That is really good.
No, but it's true. It's
accurate.
It's painfully true.
I appreciate hearing it, to be honest with you. Now, let me ask you this. When we say good, is it a relative thing? In other words, when we use it in a normal conversation with people at a dinner table, if I say, Artie's a good man, I don't mean perfect man.
No.
I mean a good man. He's
It's
a God follower.
understandable.
You know, you can count on him to be helpful. You can do all these
Right.
kind of things. If I say he's a bad man, do I mean that everything he does? See, here's where. Let me ask a question better. Can a bad person do a good thing or a good work?
Positively. They do it every day.
They do it every day.
Yeah.
So a bad person in their heart can do a good thing. The problem is their heart.
Right.
Right? It's not going to be perfect.
It's always
and
the
usually there's a reason.
Right.
Now, have you ever known a really bad person for whatever mysterious reason, right? Usually there's the Holy Spirit still dealing with them, where they actually will do a kindness and not to gain advantage. I've known guys who did that, right? Who were very wicked people who just whatever their memories of Christmas were, something. I had one guy in particular.
Yeah, compassion.
And it's a guy that you were talking about previously, who I saw after all those years. Every Christmas, when he was a heathen, he would want to pick me up, and he wanted to be part of my gift giving to my tenants. So I had some money that I would put in there, and I saw which tenants couldn't probably buy enough gifts for their children.
Sure.
So I would drive around and give them that. Well, he wanted to always give me $300 for it, right? But the rest of his life, he was a snake on everything. He lied every day for a living, right?
Right.
So when you think about it, some things. Now the Bible addresses this, right, like this. You, being evil, know how to give good gifts. That's the passage in Matthew.
Yeah.
Okay. You think about what the Lord's saying. You, being evil, know how to give good gifts. So he's telling you that you're evil. He's addressing somebody, but he's saying you know how to give good gifts, like to your children, or to somebody, or to the children of the people who bill rents to.
Right.
So you realize, okay, so here's the discussion that Dr. Gershner always would wrap me up in, and I like this discussion because I think it's useful.
Okay.
When you have bad, he called them, you can have bad good works.
Bad good works.
Or good bad works. I never could figure out which one he thought. I don't know if he used them interchangeably. I can't. So the idea is this, just that idea. You know, being evil, right? So everything you do when you're evil is bad. You being bad can do good works, right? So what you do though, if I just looked at the works, can they be bad because your motive's bad?
Right.
Good works that you do, yes.
Yeah.
Right? You can, for the wrong reason, you can take the woman home from the hospital who doesn't have transportation.
Sure.
Can you have good bad works? Well, and that's kind of hard. I say, wait a minute, think about how these things, it gets kind of complicated, but it makes you think through this subject. So you say to yourself, I better think about what a good work is.
Yeah.
Because eventually you're going to come to this division between what is good outwardly, like you already said,
right,
and good inwardly, right? That things, can you do a good thing, feed the poor for the wrong reasons? Very capable of it, right?
Easy.
For the Pharisees were capable of doing all these things, right? And yet it was for your self-interest, right? So that you'd admire me to do it.
Right.
That's why the scripture guards against it even when you're giving gifts, right? Even as what does it say? Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. So I'm saying it's important because in these discussions, when I'm sizing up who I'm talking to, I have to be very careful to cover these things in my mind because in the middle of the subject, it's fair to say, have you ever done something for a good thing for the wrong reason? Right? I will ask a question like that. See, I don't say, I bet you have, although that's what I mean, right? But I'm saying, if you think that, then the next question I'm going to say is, what are bad things? And let's think about bad things. From your perspective, as a non-Christian, your bad things look like anything that happens. So about this time, you know what I usually do? It seems out of step maybe, but I try to work it in. Dr. Gershner used to say, he asked me, what is a tragedy?
Oh.
And you know what his answer was? Anything that happens to an unbeliever.
Really?
Think about what he's saying. Right? And that question always gets them off balance. Right? They have to discuss it because they haven't heard this idea. Because when he first sprung it on me, I'd never heard it either. I'm sure I didn't know what to say. Idea being this, right? So the idea is everything a tragedy for an unbeliever that happens? Well, let me give it like this. If I get promoted at work, that's a good thing.
You would think.
If you're an unbeliever, how could that be a bad thing for you?
Well, I mean, it's all depends because it could be like maybe it'd take you away from your family more. Maybe it would increase your pride. Maybe it would. So
maybe it makes you more attractive to the women in the office.
Well, or maybe it just it could be a good thing. You could just really provide better for your family.
Suppose you get promoted all the way to CEO. How can that be a bad thing?
Yeah.
Suppose you're so wrapped up in worldliness.
Yeah.
You're a vapor here, right? It's a tragedy that you did that.
Right.
What if you win the lotto?
Yeah, you could just.
Good news.
Yeah, spend your.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
See, you can get buried by it, right?
Yeah, I see
you
that.
don't know how to handle $400,
Right.
and now you have $400 million. Now you're prey to every, right?
Yeah.
Every kind of jackal out there.
Well, the problem is, not viewing the end of what all of our life is, viewing that as like where we're going to end.
Well, let me ask you this. That now we're back to that discussion of how did the tragedy get here? Good tragedy or bad tragedy? In other words, for an unbeliever,
I see.
everything mitigates against their good interest.
Right.
Okay? It just does. Good news turns out to be bad news. Bad news turns out to be bad news. Everything works against them. The clock is ticking.
Right.
This world is ending.
Yeah.
Now, for a believer, so what's the real position you ought to run to when a tragedy comes to a believer? What verse jumps into your head?
Romans 8:28.
8:28.
All things work together for good to those who are...
You must go, you need to remind a brother or sister of that when something happens, right? All things work together for the call, those who are called according to his purpose.
Yeah, and you have to really actually believe that he means that, because it's easy to spout that off as a little lucky charm, but it's the test is when the bad things come, that there is good behind
That's
it.
it's a little late when the storm hits, you can't start building the foundation. You have to build these foundations in church before the storm hits, knowing the storms hit.
It will hit.
They do hit.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you live in the Virgin Islands, you better get used to storms coming.
Right.
So you live on Earth, you have a normal life, storms come.
They do.
They come into life.
Everybody.
And people still act like that's surprise to them. They'll call you and they'll be like, I can't believe that has happened. I'm like, the storms blow in all the time.
Right.
I mean, I'm surprised that yesterday was fair weather.
True.
Right? So, but that's because I trust in Providence as being a pillar of everything I believe. Okay? These things are in God's hands, under his control. Therefore, the world will make sense to me once I see it from his angle.
And when you know who he is,
Yes.
his goodness. I mean, he's pure safety, because he's pure goodness, he's pure power, he's purely in charge. I mean, he's totally. You have to know him.
It's funny you said that, because I'm saying to you now, the next question that comes up in these discussions is when you get stumped in the middle of this, you hit a dry spot, and you're kind of lost.
Well, and it's a very emotional discussion. This one is.
Whenever like this, almost always though, if I can't run to justice, and if I've already exhausted my thinking about Providence, which probably isn't going to happen, but let's suppose I did.
Right.
You know, what I'll do is I'll ask this question, one of these two questions. Well, Lois, tell me what God is like in your view. Or then what's the next question I'm going to ask you?
What is man like?
What is man like?
Yeah.
So now, see, now I can reset on these things. And now people say, well, how's that? I'm like, I promise you, in the middle of those things, if you say, maybe I'm not hearing you right, tell me, maybe I'd started the wrong place. See, maybe I made the mistake.
Sure.
So I'm saying to you, tell me what God is like in your view. Now, are you getting theology from these people? Yes. Their own study of God, their own determination of the truths about God, they're going to give you that.
That'll be helpful.
Some of it will be correct, most of it will be incorrect.
Right.
But it gives you a chance to ask more questions about what he just said to you.
Right. Because that's the answer to all this, is who is our God? And once we know him, it makes sense of all the dilemma.
Well, normally you get, what you get is a
suffering.
lot of this. Like, well, I think God created. You're like, okay. And then, like, how does he govern, though? Like, well, Bill, you think he's got this hands-on thing, which is kind of creepy. He's like the God who peeks always into the bedroom to see what you're doing. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, here's my view, if you're asking me, right? He's omnipresent.
Yeah.
Okay, he's ever there. All right, it's his world. Okay, and I exist for his glory. Okay, now, but from your standpoint, I get it. Now, does your God, the way you view him, does he start the world spinning and walk away? See, that's a good question. Now, see, I don't say, I bet you think, I say, is this your view? Right? Well, then if that's not it, tell me how it works when these things happen. Is God unable? Now, what you can see, we're going to go back to one of those original videos now. Is God either great, it's great versus good kind of a thing.
Right.
What happens when that car gets hit, you know, and gets rolled over by the semi-truck driver who's asleep? Couldn't God have stopped it? I don't fear any of those conversations.
Right.
Because I'm going to keep giving you real, genuine biblical theology, and at least that's my hope. And then maybe it helps you to correct your thinking.
Yeah.
At worst, these people say, well, I think you're full of crud. I don't believe any of that stuff. And I say, well, then tell me, why wouldn't God couldn't he stop it? I'll just rephrase it a little bit.
Sure.
And then they normally carry on the conversation.
Yeah.
But it's not easy.
No, and it's, you know, on all of these discussions, it's more about having a discussion with your own heart so that you really know what you believe and you really are ready to walk down the path of suffering or whatever's ahead, because it is ahead. And this isn't just like, okay, let's just tell you how it works. No, this is reality. So really walking through these and really getting a foundation is so important for me to be able to even console somebody, or I have to believe it.
If I thought I was getting to the end, I'd certainly want to ask her again, what if I had this viewpoint? See if you think I'm crazy. The real question that always intrigues me here is, why does one good thing ever happen to somebody like me, who's imperfect as I am, who never does a perfectly perfectly good deed or anything,
Yes.
right? My thoughts and intents are never perfectly aligned with God's word. Why would God continuously shower me with mercy? It tells me a lot about God. You can see why I'm going to major, I say to the guy.
From God's perspective.
How merciful he is to me. He
Yeah.
owes me nothing. He showers me with these things. Everything I have, right? What do I have that wasn't given me by God? The 1 Corinthians 4 passage. And I'm saying to you, look, that's where I want you to get to. I hope you can see my God that way one day, where you see that he's been kind to you all these years. All that other suffering things, you'll have to work that into this idea that he does all things well. And for wisdom, these things happen. I don't care. I know the loss is real. But you can't always walk past these conversations.
Right.
And sometimes, like when that Tom was mad at me all those years, I was just telling him the truth.
True.
And Tom got, fist fighting kind of mad. And then God had him find me all those years later by accident so he could tell me he converted. Because I would have guessed it never happened to Tom. So it's wonderful. So God was providentially letting me see that too.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. So I say this, don't be afraid of these discussions. You're going to get them. Just think through it yourself and find your way. I'll give you some, how I do it doesn't mean it's the right way.
I think it's really important for me, because I often think about life from my own perspective. It's, more about how's it affecting Lois or somebody I love. But if you can quiet yourself and really understand who this God is, and that he has a perspective on this, and he has a purpose, and it like you're saying, when you really look at it from his point of view and how he views us, you start like, instead of saying, I can't believe this happened, to cannot believe I'm still breathing. I've had this delicious meal. This is happening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It just, gratitude.
Yeah. Should flow from this.
Should flow.
Yeah. Amen.